The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the kitchen as Sandra stood in the doorway, experiencing a sense of unease. Her husband, Daniel, sat at the kitchen table, sipping on a cup of tea and engrossed in a crossword puzzle. Sandra had rehearsed what she wanted to say 100 times in her mind but was now experiencing difficulty formulating her thoughts. Her words felt heavy and uncertain. "Daniel," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you about something." Daniel looked up from his crossword puzzle, his warm brown eyes locking onto hers. "Sure, Sandy. What's on your mind?" She held a sheet of paper in her trembling hand. "I've been feeling restless," she admitted, her voice quivering. "I need excitement in my life, something new." Daniel raised an eyebrow, setting the crossword aside. Concern etched on his face, he asked, "Restless? Everything's been going fine, hasn't it?" Sandra took a moment to collect herself before continuing. "I'm going on a date, Daniel," she said, her voice rising in excitement. "It's with Jonathan, a coworker." She paused, her eyes alight with anticipation. "But please understand, it's just dinner. Nothing more." She smiled, her eyes sparkling with the hope of feeling alive again. Daniel's eyes widened in surprise, and his tea suddenly tasted bitter. He struggled to process what Sandra had just told him. Sandy informed Daniel of her intention to embark on a date with Jonathan. Daniel was visibly taken aback. He struggled to comprehend Sandy's assertion that she wished to date other individuals. Sandy nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. She elaborated, "I am aware that this may appear unconventional, but I am seeking a change of pace and a bit of excitement in my life. This does not signify any diminution in my affection for you, Daniel." Daniel's demeanor darkened as he rose from his seat and moved away from the table. "Daniel, this is a lot to take in. I thought we were happy together. Are you telling me you're not satisfied with our marriage?" Sandra's voice wavered as she reached out to touch his arm. "No, Daniel. I love you and I don't want to lose you. I just need this, just once." The issue at hand is not the state of their marriage, but rather Sandra's personal needs. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time appeared to stand still in the kitchen. The gravity of Sandra's confession lingered in the air, casting uncertainty over the future of their relationship. The days that followed Sandra's confession were marked by tension and discord in their previously harmonious home. Daniel was unable to shake the feeling that there was more to Sandra's dinner date with Jonathan than she had let on. Doubt and suspicion plagued him, impeding his ability to focus on anything else. One evening, as he rummaged through their cluttered closet, the scent of mothballs filling the air, Daniel's hand brushed against a shopping bag hidden behind a row of winter coats. His curiosity was piqued, and he retrieved the bag. His heartbeat accelerated as he opened it, and he was dismayed to find a slinky black dress, the silky fabric cool and seductive to the touch, and a pair of sheer stockings. The evidence was irrefutable. His wife had been planning something more than just a casual dinner. Daniel stared at the dress and stockings in disbelief. His mind raced. He thought back to Sandra's confession, the tremor in her voice, and the way her eyes had welled up with tears. She had assured him. The evening's plans had been for a casual dinner, but the evidence before him told a different story. The following morning, the atmosphere in their home was thick with unspoken tension. Daniel had barely slept, consumed by the discovery he had made. He knew he had to confront Sandra about what he had found in their dimly lit bedroom. Daniel finally gathered the courage to address the issue that had been eating away at him. Sandra sat on the edge of their bed, her eyes downcast, her face etched with worry. "Sandra," he began, his voice shaky but determined. "I found the dress and stockings. You're not being honest with me. Tell me the truth about this." "Daniel, Sandra, I must ask you about your recent date with Jonathan." "Sandra, I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't intend for things to progress in this way. I was seeking excitement in my life." "Daniel, you have not been entirely forthcoming with me, Sandra. I need to know the truth. Are you planning something more than just dinner?" With Jonathan, tears welled up in Sandra's eyes as she finally admitted, yes. Daniel, his heart aching, realized the depth of Sandra's unhappiness. He knew they were facing a crisis in their marriage. Their marriage was now in a state of crisis, with no clear path forward. The confrontation had begun, and the couple was faced with difficult decisions. The tension in the bedroom was palpable as Sandra and Daniel faced each other. Sandra's confession about her intentions for the date with Jonathan had severely damaged the trust and intimacy in their marriage. Daniel was struggling to maintain his composure and was overwhelmed with feelings of betrayal and hurt. He expressed his disbelief and anger, stating, "I can't believe you do this to us. I thought we were happy together. I thought we communicated about everything." Sandra looked down at her hands, tears streaming down her face. Tears were streaming down her face. "Daniel, I never intended to cause you pain. I felt as though I were losing myself. I believed this could rekindle excitement in our lives." Daniel paced the room, his frustration evident. "However, Sandra, why didn't you discuss this with me? Why did you choose to keep it a secret and act independently?" "My back," Sandra's voice quivered as she replied. "I was afraid, Daniel. I was afraid of how you would react, afraid of losing you. I did not want to hurt you, but I did not know how to ask for what I needed." Daniel stopped pacing and turned to face her. His expression was stern. Daniel informed Sandra that their relationship was over and that he could no longer trust her. Sandra's eyes widened in shock, and she reached out to him. "Daniel, please do not say that you want to end our marriage. This is just one date, it is not a reflection of our entire relationship. I love you, and I do not want our marriage to end." Daniel sighed deeply, torn between his desire to end the marriage and his love for Sandra. He experienced a profound sense of betrayal and a love for Sandra that he was unable to ignore. "Sandra, I require time to reflect on this matter. However, should you choose to proceed, you must be aware of the potential consequences. It would be impossible for me to continue our marriage if you were to go ahead with this plan." The atmosphere in their bedroom seemed to become more intense as they grappled with the implications of their confrontation. The atmosphere was palpably charged with the imminent possibility of a pivotal moment in the marriage of Sandra and Daniel. The pivotal moment had been reached, and the choices they made in the coming days would determine the course of their future. The night of Sandra's dinner date with Jonathan had arrived, and the atmosphere in their home was charged with a sense of impending change. Despite his ultimatum, Daniel had allowed Sandra to leave, torn between his love for her and the fear of losing their marriage. Sandra, her heart heavy with guilt and excitement, stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom wearing the slinky black dress she had bought for the occasion. She took a deep breath, her hands as she applied a touch of lipstick. Sandra was overcome with a sense of trepidation. She could not ignore the fact that her decision had put everything she held dear on the line. As she descended the stairs, she heard the faint sound of a car engine outside, which signaled Jonathan's arrival. Daniel, sitting on the couch in the living room, was unable to bring himself to look at her. His wife, Sandra, proceeded to approach the door. "Sandra," he began, his voice exhibiting a noticeable strain, "I implore you to contemplate the implications of your actions." Sandra turned to face him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Daniel," she began, her voice quivering, "I beseech you to comprehend that this does not signify a diminution in my affection for you. I merely require the opportunity to reclaim a sense of vitality." Daniel exhaled deeply and rose to his feet. The anguish of the circumstances was evident on his face. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a small envelope. "I am unable to prevent you from leaving, Sandra," he said. "However, I wish for you to have this." He handed her the envelope, which contained divorce papers. Sandra's heart sank as she gazed at the papers, her hands trembling. "Daniel, please do not do this," she pleaded. "Let's discuss this further when I return." Daniel had already made up his mind. He removed his wedding ring and placed it on the table beside her. "I hope you have a pleasant evening, Sandra." His voice was laden with sadness. With that, Sandra departed their residence. Jonathan was waiting for her in the car as the front door closed behind her. Daniel was left standing alone in the dimly lit living room, his decision to end their marriage weighing heavily on his heart. The die had been cast, and their future was now uncertain. The following day dawned with an air of melancholy in their home. Sandra had left for her dinner date with Jonathan the night before, leaving Daniel alone to grapple with the painful decisions ahead. He could not deny the hurt he felt, the sense of betrayal, and the growing realization that their marriage was unraveling. Daniel decided to take decisive action. He had already presented Sandra with divorce papers. At this juncture, he resolved to embark on a new phase of his life. The house, once a haven of love and mirth, had become a stark reminder of what was slipping away, bathed in the morning light. He retrieved a "for sale" sign from the gauge and placed it in front of their home, a tangible symbol of the transition he was undergoing. His resolve to disassociate himself from the circumstances that had previously defined his life was palpable as he affixed the "for sale" sign to the front of the house. He proceeded to pack his belongings into boxes, each item serving as a poignant reminder of the life he was leaving behind. The mere thought of returning to a place that held so many painful memories was unbearable. Memories of their happiness were now tainted by betrayal. A knock on the door interrupted his somber task. It was his friend Mark, who had come to offer support during this difficult time. Mark entered the house and surveyed the scene. Boxes were strewn about, and the words "for sale" were displayed outside. Mark inquired, "Daniel, are you sure about this?" His face displayed concern. After 10 years of marriage, could there be a way to salvage the relationship? Daniel paused in his packing. Mark said, "I love Sandra, but I can't ignore what she did. Trust has been shattered, and I can't go back to the way things were. It's time to move on." Mark nodded in understanding and offered a sympathetic pat on the back. "I'm here for you, buddy. Whatever you need, I'll help you through this." With his friend's support, Daniel continued packing his belongings. The sound of tape sealing boxes was poignant. A tangible reminder of the life he was leaving behind. The decision to end their marriage had been made, and the path ahead was filled with uncertainty. However, Daniel was unwavering in his resolve to embark on a new journey. The night had taken a tumultuous turn for Sandra and Jonathan. What had begun as a quest for excitement had spiraled into a night of emotional turmoil and unexpected consequences. As Sandra and Jonathan enjoyed their dinner at a dimly lit restaurant, their conversation became increasingly strained. Sandra was overwhelmed by feelings of guilt for betraying Daniel's trust. Jonathan sensed her distress and gently inquired about her well-being. Tears welled up in Sandra's eyes, and she began to shed them with a napkin. Jonathan expressed his regret for involving her in the situation and for going ahead with the date. He reached across the table and took her hand, conveying genuine concern. Sandra reassured him that it was not her fault and that they could discuss the matter and work through it together. However, before she could respond, a commotion erupted nearby, and the atmosphere turned chaotic as Daniel, his face flushed with anger and betrayal, stormed in. He shouted at Sandra, demanding to know how she could have done such a thing to them. Sandra's eyes widened in shock as she saw her husband standing there, his presence an unwelcome intrusion into her already conflicted world. She stammered, "Daniel, I didn't expect you to be here." Jonathan, sensing the tension, attempted to mediate. He suggested that they all sit down and talk this out calmly, but Daniel's anger was beyond control. He lunged toward Jonathan, his emotions taking control in the ensuing chaos. The scuffle erupted, and Jonathan was physically assaulted by the enraged husband. The restaurant staff rushed to break up the fight, and the scene devolved into chaos. Tears streamed down Sandra's face as she watched the aftermath of the altercation. She realized that her pursuit of excitement had not only jeopardized her marriage but also resulted in physical harm to someone she cared about. In the following chapter, the trio is separated, Sandra is distraught, and guilt is evident. Jonathan is nursing his injuries, and Daniel is standing outside the restaurant. While Amber is subsiding, Daniel's heart is heavy with the knowledge that their marriage is irrevocably damaged. The consequences of their actions have left them all reeling, and the path forward remains uncertain. The morning after the chaotic restaurant confrontation, the sun rises over a world forever altered for Sandra, Daniel, and Jonathan. The fallout from their tumultuous night, they had sustained wounds that were both physical and emotional in nature, and which required time to heal. Daniel was still grappling with the pain of betrayal and the violence he had unleashed. He was aware that his marriage with Sandra had reached its breaking point. He had returned home exhausted and conflicted, and it was now time to face the final resolution. As he entered their once shared home, Daniel found Sandra sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of sadness And regret, Daniel, she began, her voice shaky. I'm sorry for what happened last night. I never wanted any of this. Daniel sighed heavily, the weight of their shattered relationship evident in his tired eyes. Sandra, I can't deny that I love you, but I can't go back to the way things were. I've made my decision and I'm leaving. Tears welled up in Sandra's eyes as she nodded in understanding. I know, Daniel. I don't blame you. I've hurt you deeply, and I can't expect you to forgive me. In assessing his own role in the tumultuous events that had recently transpired, Daniel had sought to provide support to Sandra and to confront the consequences of his involvement. Daniel, still grappling with a complex emotional landscape, regarded Jonathan with a blend of anger and resignation. He stated, in a low and controlled voice, "You need to stay away from us. You played a role in these events, and I do not wish to see you near my wife again." Jonathan, burdened by a sense of guilt, nodded in agreement. I understand, Daniel, he replied. He had never desired this outcome. Daniel gathered his belongings and exited the residence, leaving behind a life he had known for a decade. The house, now a silent witness to the dissolution of a marriage, conveyed a sense of loss and a glimmer of hope for a new beginning. He had made a challenging decision, but he was confident it was the most appropriate course of action for his own well-being. Sandra, isolated in her residence, observed her husband's vehicle departing down the avenue. She confronted the repercussions of her conduct and was compelled to identify strategies for reconstructing her life in the wake of her marriage's dissolution. The ultimate resolution had materialized, yet the prospective trajectory remained ambiguous for all three individuals. The events of the preceding days had inflicted wounds that would necessitate time to recuperate, and each would have to ascertain their own means of moving forward from the devastation of a once promising romantic relationship.